Well, hello again. I was looking at this the other day. This is Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell being interviewed by Joe Rogan. I'll leave a link to this video below. I'm only going to play a couple of minutes of this and make a couple of comments about it. I think it's worth it. It's interesting and it's worth mentioning.
Seem to take out every 8 or 10 years.
So that's a very specific memo, and this is actually this is the first time I'll be very clear with people about it. It's a big topic of conversation right now. It's called the Wilson Memo. You can look it up. Admiral Wilson met with a scientist who's actually was featured in one of my films.
Yeah, okay. So Jeremy Corbell, who's doing very nicely out of this UFO ET business. I had another clip of him actually saying, well, you know, since he's got into this and he's been making these sort of films, he doesn't need a proper job. He can get up when he likes, he can do what he likes. So he's got an agenda to peddle this stuff. And he just said that Admiral Wilson met with a scientist, the scientist featured on one of Jeremy Corbell's films. So he knows the name of the scientist. He doesn't mention the name of the scientist because he knows Joe Rogan will just get his guy there to Google him and see what Mr. Google says about the scientist he's talking about. The scientist he's talking about is Eric Davis. Okay, so if we just have a look at something from Eric Davis. There we go. This is Eric Davis. This is the guy Corbell is talking about, and this is why Corbell doesn't name him. Lazar made up his entire cockamamie story. Okay, that's what Eric Davis has to say about Bob Lazar. That's why Jeremy Corbell, and there's Eric Davis, and that's why Jeremy Corbell doesn't mention the name of the scientist that met Admiral Wilson. Admiral Wilson denied any knowledge of it, of course. He said there was, you know, there was no UFO program that he was aware of. He wasn't interested in looking for one. If there was one going on, he would have known about it. So this is the 16th of the 10th, 02. I don't know why the Americans always write their dates back to front. EWD is Eric Davis Notes. I don't know what his middle name is. But Eric Davis meeting with Admiral Wilson. I'll leave a link to this document below so you can read that in its entirety. Okay. So Jeremy Corbell is talking about the meeting of Eric Davis, who's the scientist he's talking about, meeting with Admiral Wilson. There's Eric Davis. Lazar made up his entire cockamamie story, and he said that he knew the supervisor of Bob Lazar at wherever it was, whatever installation he was working at, and he said that he wasn't a physicist and that he was just a technician doing radiation monitoring, instrumentation, badges, radiation badges, that sort of stuff. Okay, so now there's we go back to Jeremy Corbell. Remember, he's being interviewed by Joe Rogan, and he's just said a scientist met with Admiral Wilson. The scientist appeared on one of his films. He doesn't name the scientist. He deliberately doesn't name the scientist. And the reason he doesn't name the scientist is that it's going to... Joe Rogan will get his staff to Google the scientist's name, and that would lead to some very awkward questions for Bob Lazar in this interview. I'm assuming Joe Rogan wants to get to the truth. He's not just sensationalizing this stuff. He's actually interested in getting to the bottom of it, as I am, finding out whether this is really happening or whether it's just a lot of science fiction nonsense spruiked by people that are grifting a living off it. Okay, now the same Joe Rogan video, there's a couple of other just little small clips of Bob Lazar that I'd like to show you. Okay, this is from a bit further on in the video. This is at, I don't know what's this, 56 minutes. The other one was about 27 minutes if you want to look at that clip. As I said, I've left this video, a link to this video below.
Started because you're realizing that you're being monitored.
Now I know not only am I being monitored, but now I know I'm in trouble. And it wasn't a short time after that that I contacted, at that time, the only investigative reporter I had heard of in Las Vegas was George Knapp. And,
You're right.
told him.
Yeah, he would have known that. Nat would snap this up.
Some of the story, because I had no idea what the hell was going to happen at that point.
So George Knapp tries to dissect your story, tries to find holes in it, tells it, puts it online, and makes everybody aware of it, and that's how I found out about it.
Yeah, to make a long story short.
What happens, to really make a long story short, what happens from there on? I mean, do they contact you and say, hey Bob, it's probably a good idea if you shut up? Did they try to label you as crazy? Was there...
There were a lot of things that happened between that point. I'm leaving out a lot of stuff to fill in the story. We'd have to go back to Los Alamos and well, I really don't want to talk about that. The
top secret weapons stuff that you were working on.
No, I'm talking about the 115.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I have to think about how I...
What is the problem?
Yeah, good question, Joe. What is the problem? The problem is Lazar's made up his entire cockamamie story, and he doesn't want to give any details that contradict stuff he's details he's given in the past, because it's all bullshit.
I don't want to get myself into more trouble by admitting something, so I just have...
Oh yeah, it's all happened when, 40 years ago, and he doesn't want to get in trouble by admitting something. Absolute nonsense, isn't it? Drivel.
To dance around a couple...
He was rated just during the filming of the movie. People thought it was...
The movie's great, by the way.
Thanks, Joe.
And it's on Netflix right now, if anybody wants to check it out. And if you want to...
push the movie... push the movie, Jeremy. You want to be able to get up late and not have a real job.
Those people like me who, I've always loved the idea of UFOs. I became extremely weary talking to people who are UFO believers and UFO fanatics because there's so many of them that are full of shit. And not just full of shit,
Yeah, you're looking at a couple now, Joe.
They're childishly delirious. Like the way they talk about things. I mean, there's so many people that I'm in contact, they reach me in the night and they explain to me what we're doing.
Well, hopefully Joe's interested in the truth.
Into the ocean is wrong, and you're like, okay.
This is one of the reasons I didn't want to do the show.
I'm sure.
Well, no, it's no, it's no joke. We've had people literally camp out on our front lawn, and in some ways I can relate to some of these people. Maybe some of them did really have some kind of experience or saw something, and all their friends think they're crazy. But hey, now there's this guy I heard on the radio, and at least he knows I'm not full of shit, so I gotta talk to him.
Right.
And so most of the correspondence I get are people trying to get a hold of me, going, Bob, you gotta listen to me. I'm coming to talk to you. I'm driving from Oklahoma or whatever, but some of them are just fucking batshit crazy, and they're frightening.
There's a lot of schizophrenics that are involved in the conspiracy world. So there's a lot of people that have real issues.
Joe, it would be a disservice to your audience to not say that we have to look at what's going on now and understand. I've heard on your show a bunch of stuff about what's going on now, and to not really understand.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, okay, so we can see Bob Lazar faltering again. I think he does it again. I'll just see if I can find another clip. Jeremy Corbell gets really quite upset and starts swearing and sort of making excuses for Lazar. You've already heard him say, oh, he's got a migraine, But the truth of the matter is, of course, that there is no truth to this matter. Okay, this is the bit where Jeremy Corbell gets a bit agitated. Actually, I don't know if some of this clip might have been in the previous clips I showed, but I don't have a great deal of time to muck around with this.
That's exactly the state we were at. We played around with the parts long enough before I got there where they could make the reactor operate.
We played around with the parts long before I got there. He means that they played around with the parts. Of course, It's nonsense. It's a steaming file.
Take the fuel out and know that it makes it work. How exactly what was going on in the reactor remained a mystery at the time. I think we made some progress on what was going on inside, but I don't think anybody really knew anything. They could just watch what was going on and make note of it.
How long were you there?
I'd say about 6 months or so.
And what
I thought he was there for 16 days.
progress was made while you were there?
Well, we came up with a bunch of reasonably good ideas about how the reactor worked. And one of them was the square base of it was essentially like a cyclotron, which is a small particle accelerator, a circular one. Particle accelerators, linear particle accelerators, are just a, long tube essentially, and they accelerate particles with high voltage and, radio frequencies till they reach high speeds. But a cyclotron does that in a small circular area. And there's this very heavy element fuel, element 115, something that wasn't on our periodic charts at the time.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
When did it become on the periodic table now, the way the charts now?
I don't remember. Do you remember when they...
2004, Darmstadt, Germany, I think is where they first fabricated 4 atoms. They lasted 220 milliseconds with the atoms. It's nothing, right? And then it later was discovered a couple more times they could fabricate it. Then they gave it a place then on the periodic chart. After that, called it moscovium.
So they told you about this stuff in 1982?
Yeah, well,
No,
we
not
kind of...
1982.
What year was this?
It was 88 and 89
When
I
you were
was
there.
there.
Oh, okay.
82 is when
82
I
was
was
when you
at
were
Los Alamos.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So 88, 89, they told you about this stuff. So this was not like...
No, they didn't tell me about it. That's one of the things that this group came up with. The God, I keep losing my train of thought with this thing.
So this one area, this element 115 was the fuel.
Yeah, it was the fuel.
Trying to remember the story.
The world will forgive you for having a migraine. Can I just
It's really
say
hard to
one-
think through this. Just give me a
We'll
minute.
just give you more
I just want to
booze.
say one. Yeah, definitely. I just want to say one thing. But for the last 30 years, people have just been on the attack on Bob. Getting to know him, the personal effects on his life. It's really hard to understand unless you meet his family and his wife. I mean, this is the last thing he wanted to fucking do was
The last thing he wanted to fucking do, really. Why does anybody need to know his family? This is completely irrelevant, isn't it? I mean, he's putting himself out in the public. He's putting himself on a global social media platform and talking about this stuff, and he's done it many times. So, if he's worried about any effects on his family, he wouldn't be doing that, would he? This is an absolute steaming pile. This guy here, Jeremy Corbell, look at he gets it seriously. The glaring eyes. As soon as you challenge anything he or Bob Lazar says, he gets really quite angry. This guy. That tells me that he knows it's all rubbish. The other thing that tells me that it's all rubbish is that he deliberately just said to Joe Rogan, when he was talking about the Admiral Wilson letters, a scientist he's made a film about. He deliberately doesn't name the scientist because the scientist is Eric Davis. And we know what Eric Davis has to say about Bob Lazar, and he doesn't want Joe Rogan's guy Googling Eric Davis because he will see this. I've showed it to you before, but I'll show it to you again. Eric Davis. Lazar made up his entire cockamamie story. Bob Lazar made up his entire cockamamie story about the UFO that he saw in a building inside Area 51. He was never exposed to any classified information, facilities or programs in his work area. Yeah. And that's a quote from Dr. Eric Davis. That's the scientist Jeremy Corbell is talking about earlier in this video, where he says, a scientist The Admiral Wilson letters are really a big thing. They're not, of course. There's no provenance for the Admiral Wilson letters. It's actually just a note written by Eric Davis. There's no provenance on it. He could have written it. It's supposedly from 2002. He could have written it last week. Well, actually, I think it was last year or so, wasn't it? This stuff came to light. But he could have written it the week before, whenever it became public. You know, this is all science fiction rubbish. And he knows it. So does Bob Lazar. So I saw a video the other day, Bob Lazar, you know, this scientist that's made this hydrogen powered car, and he showed this Corvette with the hydrogen bottles in the back, completely stationary, the engine wasn't running. I left a comment on that video saying, why don't we see the car running on a dyno, you know, why don't we see it running on a dyno and then switch between petrol and hydrogen fuel? You know, they deleted the comment because it's all props, it's all science fiction rubbish. It's a steaming pile. All of this UFO ET stuff. It's just absolute bloody rubbish. Alright, well I think that'll do. It's only a short one this, but I mean anybody that can watch this, anybody that watches this and then believes Bob Lazar could have any credibility. I mean, is there anybody out there that thinks Bob Lazar has any credibility? Put your hand down, Jenkins, stupid boy. Of course he doesn't. Alright, well thanks for watching. Maybe I'll catch you again.